Welcome to episode number 26 of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast, a show where I talk to introverts who grow their business and make a difference. I'm Sarah Zenek-Roche. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today I'll be talking to Shayna Oliveira, an introverted English teacher who found a business model for teaching English without draining her energy. But before that, I'd like to take a moment to make a short announcement. In 2 days, on Sunday, I will be taking a flight to Rome to meet about 8 fellow marketers for a retreat, a marketing retreat in Tuscany. So I have to fly to Rome and then take a train 2 hours back up north. And we are meeting in this amazing villa somewhere in the hills of Tuscany. So as an introvert, you can probably imagine that that's quite, I'm very much looking forward to it, but at the same time, I'm a bit anxious about spending a week with people that I don't know. I know the organizer. It's Lou Borton, who has been on this podcast before. So I've talked to him. I know him. He's a fellow introvert. But I don't know all the other people who are going to show up. So, it'll be interesting for me to kind of find this balance between masterminding and still kind of, get my alone time, I guess, because, if I'm going to spend 12 hours per day with other people, I probably get very exhausted. So I need to make sure that I still have my alone time. But that's not the announcement I wanted to make. I wanted to just tell you about this because I signed up to this retreat. And by the way, Lou knows that's one of the reasons why I signed up to his retreat, is because I want to launch or host my own retreat in Sicily in 2018. So because I've never been on a marketing retreat like that, I decided, first I need to be on somebody else's retreat so that I can see how this works, how it's organized, how, people work together and all of that before I host my own retreat. So the big announcement really is that I'm going to be hosting my own marketing retreat for introverts in Sicily in May 2018. I said it out loud now, so now there's no going back. That's what's coming up, and I'm looking forward to it. It'll be great. Yeah, maybe you don't know that about me yet, but Sicily is kind of where half of Sarah spends her time, or at least even if she's here in Switzerland, half her heart is always in Sicily. My husband is originally from Sicily. That's why we decided to buy a house in Sicily. I've always loved the Italian culture, and it also reminds us of California a lot because, it's hot, there's palm trees, it's outdoor living. So that's why we spend, probably not half of our lives yet, but eventually much more time in Sicily, and half in Sicily and half in Switzerland. So anyway, long story short, the big announcement is that I will be hosting a marketing retreat for introverts in Sicily in May 2018, and you'll be hearing more details about this retreat as we go and as we get closer, of course. So now on to the show, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking to Shayna Oliveira, who went from a struggling classroom teacher to a successful online business owner. She now sells online courses and ebooks teaching English as a second language through her website espressoenglish.net, where more than 100,000 students follow her lessons. Shayna also podcasts about her online business experience at entrepreneursinmotion.com. Hi, Shayna. How are you today?
Good, Sarah. How about you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. It's really great to talk to you. We met on one of the podcast Facebook groups, right? That's how we got introduced to each other. This is a great Facebook group. For those who don't know, it's a Facebook group for ladies, basically. and I think it's called She Podcasts, and I've been on it for quite a while. And so I just they have these days where you can, kind of promote your own podcast or ask for guests. And so I was like, hey, is there any other introverts on this podcast? And so you reached out to me, so that was great. So, Shayna, besides your official bio, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe something that our introverted audience can relate to?
Yeah, sure. So before I was an entrepreneur, I was an English teacher in Brazil. And so I was teaching in classrooms. And I loved teaching, but there were two problems with it. One, it paid really badly, unfortunately. And the other thing is that it really drained my energy to be in front of a class. So I loved my students, but by the time I got home, my husband would be like, hey, let's go out. And I'd be like, no, I'm done for the day. So I just always felt really drained after having so much interaction in the class. And so when I decided to start my online business, which is also teaching English as a second language, I thought this is great because I can work from home at my computer to produce the lessons. And in addition to giving me a little bit more freedom with my schedule and how many hours I would like to work, it was also great because usually after a whole day in front of my computer, then I would be ready to go out and socialize. And so I felt like I wasn't spending all my energy at work. I was actually working in a way that I was more comfortable with and then was ready to go and be social a little later after the workday was over.
Right. So you really found what works for you and kind of created that created the business model around it. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
So tell us a bit more about your background because so you were a teacher, but we just discussed in the off, like before I recorded, that you're actually no longer based in Brazil. And when I did my research, I'm like, oh, okay, somebody based in Brazil. And so now you moved back to the US. But did you actually grow up in Brazil?
No, I grew up in the US, but my husband is Brazilian. So that's why,
okay.
that's why we were living down there. And I started teaching English because I was like, I want to be doing something. And the other thing that happened while we were in Brazil was that the teaching schedule was a little bit unpredictable because sometimes there would be holidays or transportation issues. And at one point, there was a police strike. So the police went on strike. And that meant the city was not so safe anymore. And so all of the classes were canceled. And that meant I wasn't going to get paid because no classes. And that was the moment at which I thought, you know what, I've got to do something else. And that kind of sparked my online efforts because I thought I can't have my whole income be dependent on sometimes these local conditions, which I can't control. And so that was another thing that that environment also led me towards working online and starting my own business.
Nice. So tell us a bit more about this business. How do you currently generate revenue? So I assume, like for me right now, I'm taking Italian classes, but they're with a real teacher over Skype. So when you say online, that's probably not what you mean, right? Are they recorded classes?
They are recorded classes. When I started, I knew I didn't want to do one-on-one conversation just because it was going to be too hard to schedule. And I, again, wanted something with a little bit more flexibility and freedom. So what I do is I create courses. So I have one, for example, about business English. So I created 30 lessons, and when someone buys the course, they pay for it, and then they can access those lessons anytime they like. And a few of my courses have some interactive elements, like there are times when students can send me an assignment that they've completed or can even record their speaking and send it to me. But then I can, again, correct it on my own time and send it back to them. I have a feeling that a lot of my students are probably introverts as well because they like to study, on their own, self-paced, self-motivated, as opposed to someone like my husband who is a very social learner and he really thrives in a classroom. So it's kind of nice because I think my students' personality also matches well with my teaching style and their learning style.
Nice. So are there different levels? Like you said, there's business English, but there's also very beginner's English.
There are different courses. I don't do anything for very, very beginners just because I think you need to have a little bit of content in your own native language in order to just get that take those first steps. But I have courses in business, pronunciation, vocabulary, listening, speaking. I kind of divide it up by area of the language. I have a book on confusing words, words that learners tend to confuse. A lot of this was based on my classroom experience. So I felt like I had a good idea of what people needed to know. And then the rest of the courses actually developed from my interacting with my online subscribers. I would email them and say, hey, what do you guys want to learn? Let's vote on the topic of the next course. And then they would give me that feedback so I could create something that people really wanted.
Nice. So you do have that kind of interaction. So there's a community. People are not just on their own once they signed up. You kind of have, is this like a membership site or how does this work?
No, actually, it's just an email list. And so they're receiving some free tips from me, and that's how they get to know me and my teaching style. And sometimes I do write an email that encourages them to reply to me. I opted not to have any sort of membership site or Facebook group because I realized that specifically in the language learning niche, most people want to interact with me, not necessarily with each other. And so I thought, I don't want to overwhelm myself with thousands and thousands of messages needing replies. So I think I'm going to just do the email list and the online courses. But I know that in other areas, something like a membership site or a private Facebook group can be effective in getting people to connect with each other.
Yeah, it's true. That's what you most often hear, but it's also true that, well, the owner, the person who runs that business, well, needs to have the resources and needs to be, willing to do all that interacting and engagement. Because yes, it is time consuming and for us introverts, also energy consuming. So you have to be ready for it.
Yeah.
So you don't have any one-on-one interaction with anybody?
Nope, it's all through email. I don't have any calls. I don't have any scheduled, times that I have to be online.
You don't miss that part?
Not really, honestly.
No? Okay.
I'm lucky that I do get to learn a bit about my students through some of these email assignments. So sometimes, for example, I have a lesson about stereotypes and I'll ask them, write to me, what are 3 stereotypes of your country that you don't think are true? And then it's interesting for me because I get to read about them and get to know them a little bit that way. And then I correct it and send it back.
Okay.
But I was the child who had pen pals and I loved writing to people. And so I've always really loved written correspondence. I think that's why I thrive on this online course and correspondence through email.
Nice. Yeah. And like you said, you seem to be attracting the same kind of audience who likes that as well. That's great. So let's talk about introverted superpowers, as I like to call them. What do you think is your biggest strength as an introverted online business owner? So not as an introvert in general, but for this online business?
I think it's the ability to create great content just on my own by sitting down and focusing, because my whole strategy is based on content marketing. So I wrote hundreds of blog posts. I've produced dozens of podcasts. I've even gotten into YouTube videos, which is a little bit harder as an introvert, but I do publish YouTube videos. And those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content, which I've just produced completely on my own, are what draw people to the site and help people get to know me and then eventually lead to those sales. And so that ability to every day just sit down, well, not necessarily every day, but very frequently sit down and produce a new piece of content, just kind of focus down and get that piece of content published, I think has had a really nice cumulative effect of building my business over time.
That's great. So how long have you been doing this?
5 years.
Oh, yeah. So it has built up over time because obviously, you need to start somewhere, and on the net, it's like everything. It always has to do with content. So that's great. What about a challenge that, yes, your business is very much built around this kind of online thing, but I'm sure there's challenges as well that you kind of have to face because you're an introvert. What do you think it would be?
Well, I will say that I made the mistake in the beginning of doing everything only on my own and not reaching out to anybody else in my niche or anyone else who could have been a partner or do a joint venture with me. Nowadays, when I teach people about entrepreneurship, I say, when you're first starting out, the best way to build your audience is to connect with other people who already have these audiences and do something together. And I've seen people, go from like 0 to a few thousand subscribers really fast. I didn't do that. I was too shy, too insecure, just too focused on my own thing. And as a result, it took 6 to 9 months for the traffic to really build up. And I could have saved myself a lot of time if I had just reached out to other people with audiences and made those connections. So that was, I'd say, a mistake I made, but I always encourage other people not to make that mistake. Start building some relationships because those can be really beneficial for both parties when you work together with someone else in your niche.
It's true. I totally agree. But I'd also like to kind of, share that maybe it's part of that journey, because when you're a beginning entrepreneur, well, you don't have that same confidence. And so you don't show up the same way maybe. And so maybe you just need to go through those kind of building, let's say, months or sometimes years to get to that level of confidence and be able to say, hey, this is what I have to offer. And then people will notice that confidence, right? So
I think you're right. Yeah. Now I'm the one getting approached, actually. And it's interesting because even if someone is very new, if what they have is pretty good, I'm open to working with them. So I think sometimes people think, oh, I need to have at least 100 blog posts before I can even think about reaching out. That's not true. If I see 3 good posts on your site and I think, hey, this person's a good writer, I'll let the person guest post. So speaking from the other side now, I can say, I know it is hard naturally when you're first starting out, but if you're reasonably confident that you have something to offer, give it a try. The worst the other person can say is, no, it's not quite a good fit. And you haven't lost anything. You've just extended an offer and maybe next time. So,
yeah. But as you said, for us introverts, I think it is especially hard, right? To just go up to people and say, hey, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
It's definitely challenging.
Well, I'll tell you that what has worked when people approach me, which I think is maybe a little easier, is someone wrote to me, for example, and all they did was say, hey, I love your stuff and I've used it with my students and, they really appreciate it. It was just fan mail. And so that's a pretty easy letter to write. Right? You're not asking for anything. You're not pitching anything. And, that made me happy. I responded to the person. And then later we had a few back and forth emails. And then later he said, would you like me to guest post for your site? I can do this. And I said, okay, I already knew him. I already knew he followed my site. And so maybe if someone's afraid to reach out, a first step could just be just write something thanking the other person, expressing some gratitude or saying, hey, your stuff really helped me in these specific ways. And that I think is maybe easier than to feel like you're intruding by asking for something, because I guarantee that you'll make the person's day and that could be the thing that opens the door to the relationship.
Yeah, that's totally true. And maybe sometimes you think, but these people probably get hundreds and hundreds of emails. It's not true, right? Like those nice emails, we do notice them, and it's true.
They stand out.
They stand out. So that's a good strategy. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Take us to a moment, like an aha moment, whether it is in your business, something that just kind of made you pivot or realize, oh, okay. Or maybe it has to do with your introversion, just some moment that kind of stood out.
Sure. Before I had created a course, I was just blogging and building my subscribers, and I still wasn't quite sure about how to monetize, how to get income from the site. And I was at the English school where I was still teaching. I was still doing some classes, and people were signing up there for the next semester. And I realized that they were swiping their credit card and paying for the whole semester worth of classes, which would be delivered over time. And I thought, hey, if people sign up and pay in advance for classes offline, It could also do that online. And so what I did is I pre-sold my course. So I hadn't created yet. I hadn't created anything yet. I just made a sales page and I told my subscribers, hey guys, travel English course starting August 1st. You're going to get one lesson a day for 30 days, sign up here. And they did that. And as long as I communicated exactly when those lessons were going to be delivered, people had no problem pre-paying for it. And then they would get the course contents over time. And that worked well. Not a huge number of people signed up, but enough that I said, hey, this works. And now I can actually get paid before I spend all this time creating the lessons. And I did that same thing for every single one of my courses after that. Now I have 12 or 13 courses. They've all been pre-sold to my audience, and then I've created and delivered them over time.
That's great, because at the same time you were getting feedback maybe on what they wanted in the course and in the different modules.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a marketing technique also for other, products or video courses or anything. Often you hear, launch it first and then create the actual product, because then you get feedback from the early adopters. So great.
Yep. Yeah, and those people tend to be your biggest fans too. So if you mess up, you send out a broken link, they tend to be forgiving, or they'll help you out. And that's what I found with all of my customers. And it's also it's great for two more reasons. One is that sometimes as introverts, I think we can get lost a little bit in our own heads, and so like you said, getting feedback from people. Instead of creating the product that I want to make, I'm creating the product that the customers want to have or the students want to take. And the other thing is it's great motivation. You can't procrastinate when you know that people already paid and they're expecting the lesson on Friday. So if you've ever struggled with procrastination, or maybe you're a perfectionist and you spend too much time tweaking something, if you pre-sell something and then you promise that it has to be out, well then you got to get it done. And so that really motivated me. Yeah.
I do that with my webinars all the time. I plan the date, I announce the date, and then I'm like, oh no, now I actually have to do it. But yeah, that's the only way to get me to do webinars. So,
but it works. It works.
Yes.
The only thing that I would recommend if you do use that strategy is make sure afterwards you give yourself a few weeks to decompress, because I've found it very intense. It's great, and you have a product at the end of it, but then afterwards I tend to need usually 4 to 6 weeks just to go a little bit lighter, and then naturally I kind of get my energy back for the next launch.
Yeah, totally. Any kind of launch, whether it's pre-sold or not, I think it's very intensive for introverts, because it's all this pushing, all this asking and all of that. So yeah, definitely very intense for introverts. So you do have to schedule time in for recovery after.
Yes, very important.
Okay, great. Okay, I always share 3 golden nuggets with my listeners. So the first one would be a personal habit something that you do on a regular basis that you think contributes to your success.
This is a little bit more of maybe a strategic habit or a mindset. But I actually come from a science background. I studied chemistry in college, and I think I've taken some of that mindset into my entrepreneurship, in that I'm always experimenting and iterating and improving things bit by bit. So if something doesn't work for me, I don't see it as a catastrophic failure. Instead, I try to analyze it. What went wrong? How can I do better? I'm always experimenting with new marketing strategies and seeing, I experimented with webinars. They didn't work so well for me, but I said, okay, well, it was an experiment, didn't work. Let's try a different direction. And just doing that trial and error over the past 5 years has gotten me to where I am. So, nobody taught me, nobody gave me a formula, but just this ability to try things, implement, and then analyze. Did it work? Did it not work? Could it be better? Has taken me really, really far. So I guess it's just a worldview or a way of looking at things.
Yeah, I guess that's a blessing to be able to see things like that, because sometimes you also hear the other stories where entrepreneurs get very discouraged because they try all these things and nothing works, and so they're like, well, which way do I go now? So
Right.
good thing that you can look at it like that and think that it's just part of entrepreneurship, and you try something and get something new going. So the second golden nugget would be an internet resource. So something, that you use for your online marketing or something like that.
This is a really simple little program called followupthen.com. And it's a super easy way to do reminders by email. So my tendency sometimes is to try to keep everything in my head. And that's really bad because it'll stress you out and you're going to forget something. But I also don't like to fill up my calendar with tons of reminders because then my calendar looks clogged and it also stresses me out. So what Follow Up Then does is if you want to be reminded about something at a certain date, you can just forward an email to, for example, for this interview, I forwarded an email to myself for February 16th, 9 a.m. at followupthen.com. So you just make up the email address and it will boomerang it back to your inbox at that time. So I can give myself permission to forget about it until the day when it comes back into my inbox, and then I'm reminded of it. And it's been just super helpful for, let's say if I have a good idea for a launch 3 months from now, but I don't want to spend the next 3 months with it rattling around in my head and maybe forgetting, I'll just send that email to, September 1st at followupthen.com, and it will come back into my email inbox on that date. And so it's really helpful. It's such a little thing, but it helps.
I love that. I've never heard of that. And my calendar looks exactly like you just described. It's all these, and I hate it. It feels like I'm so busy, but actually I don't want to get into this.
Yeah.
Reminders. I'll definitely look that up and link to it in the show notes. Thanks so much.
Sure.
It sounds like a great little trick.
Mm-hmm.
What about books? I'm sure you're a book reader, right? Most introverts are. So which book would you recommend to the introvert biz growth audience, and why?
Well, I just reread one of my favorites, which is Essentialism by
my favorite too.
Oh, funny.
Yes.
I found it helpful earlier in my business, and now that my business has grown, it's also very important because with growth sometimes tends to come complexity or overwhelm, and so Essentialism helps you identify what's really essential, what's really impactful in both life and business. I think this is good for both areas, honestly. Mm-hmm. And so thus where you want to focus your time and energy and thoughts, and, give yourself permission not to care so much about the rest because you're focusing on what's truly, truly important to you. So that's a book that's definitely worth reading multiple times and trying to apply it in order to make sure your life and your business are going the way that you truly want them to.
Yeah, totally agree. On my website, I actually have a resource called Say No to Grow, because I think a lot of introverts also struggle with saying no because we have usually a lot of empathy and we feel so bad saying no to people or no to opportunities. And that's where essentialism also comes in and tells you, yeah, but if you keep saying yes to everything, then other people will basically manage your calendar. And yes. So do you still have time to do what is important for you? And probably not if you keep saying yes to everybody else. So
not only that, but I think that, in your first few years of business, you really do have to do a lot, right? It takes a lot to get a business off the ground. And one thing that I found is that, okay, you're in hustle mode. Everyone tells you, you got to hustle, you got to do more, you got to say yes to everything. It might be a little more true in the early years, but then once you've kind of gotten a little bit of stability, you're bringing in some income, you're happy with where your business has reached, you don't have to keep hustling. You don't have to take it to a $1 million business if that's not what you want for your life or for your particular mission. And in the past year, I've actually been dealing with this myself because I've been so hustle that it's actually hard to step back and say, okay, now I can be a little bit more selective. Things are going all right, and I can really, truly pick and choose the projects I want to work on. I don't have to be going 110% full steam ahead all the time. And so it's a definite transition. But that's interesting. Say no to grow. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right. We get in the habit of always saying yes and hustling and more projects. And so it's hard to kind of go back and say, okay, now I have to learn to say no to certain things. Definitely. And you're right, like, when is it enough? That's another discussion I had with one of the guests. When is it enough? Well, you decide when it's enough. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
And so I actually decided that this year that whenever during the last week of the month, if I've made my target, I'm just going to do an extra yoga class, take Friday morning off and go to yoga. I don't have to keep hustling because I'm, when am I going to live otherwise?
Right. Yeah, I tend to do that too. I'll set a goal even just for the day. I say, okay, I'm going to edit 5 lessons today. And I get through 5 by noon and I'm like, oh, I could do 5 more. And I kind of have to, say, sometimes you are in a groove and you want to keep going, but I also need to kind of say, okay, no, that's enough for today. I met my goal. Yeah. I can, take it back up again tomorrow because there's always more to be done.
Yes, exactly. Excellent. Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. I always end the podcast with a mindful ending. So what are you grateful for today or this week or this month?
Oh, well, this week has been a bit of a crazy one for me. There have been a bunch of other personal commitments and family commitments. And so this week I'm really grateful that I have set up my business so that it's pretty automated and I can maintain it by just spending a couple minutes on email just to make sure no one has any problems logging in or anything like that. And that has been a lifesaver this week because otherwise I would have been, life stuff comes up, cars break down, stuff happens, you get sick. I'm a little congested right now in case you couldn't tell, but because of the way I've structured my business, I'm super thankful that whereas in the past, if I was sick or whatever, or had other stuff going on, I would just miss work and then my income would take a hit. Now the business is such that it's stable, it keeps going, students can keep signing up for classes. So I'm really, really grateful for that, especially this week. It's been a little crazy.
Nice. Yeah, like you said, life happens. And so it's nice to be able to deal with stuff and the money keeps going in. But I'm sure you spent a lot of time working on that beforehand. So let's not forget that there's a lot of hours in that business. Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your crazy week and
sure.
Go take care of yourself. And it was a really nice discussion. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Sarah.
Don't forget to check out Shayna's website at espressoenglish.net. And as I mentioned in the intro, Shayna also hosts her own podcast at entrepreneursinmotion.com. That's it for this episode of the Introvert Biz Growth Podcast. You'll find this episode's show notes at sarahsenecroce.com/episode 26. And if you don't have it yet, get your free 4-step guide on how to say no to grow. If you like this episode, can I please ask you for a favor and subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and tell your introverted friends about it. And just a friendly reminder that you can also make a tiny contribution to help me cover the costs for the show at sarahsenecroce.com/Patreon. Thanks so much for your contribution, and I'll talk to you again in 2 weeks. Take care. Bye-bye.